leading again to fear. But you have received a spirit of adoption as sons, by which we cry out, Abba, Father. The Spirit himself testifies with our spirit that we are children of God. Lord, we come to you this morning, your children, and we cry out with thankful hearts in gratitude for the way that you've loved us, for the way that you care for us. We cry out in awe because of your perfection in power, in justice, and strength. Your perfection of mercy and grace, and faith and in love. We cry out to you from a broken world that's searching for you. A world searching for you and it doesn't even realize it sometimes. Looking for you in all the wrong places and all the wrong things. Thank you for meeting us here today, Lord. Father.
Tender whisper of love.
have a seat. Have a seat, knowing that that is who you are. You, no matter where you are at this morning, are loved by the good, perfect Father. In a couple minutes, we're going to sing another song. It's going to be a new song for you. We'll sing it through once, and then we'll invite you to sing it with us. I almost shared this on the spot a couple of months ago. Gary Johnson did a communion meditation on the blood. I don't know if you remember that or not. You remember it, Gary? Can you repeat it today? Because it would have been perfect to go with the song, but no, I'm just kidding. But it was a really good meditation, and I was standing up there thinking, wow, I got this song, and I wanted to introduce it, and it would have been so spot on right now. But I didn't quite have it right yet, so that didn't happen. But the song is about power in the blood, and we already have a song, There's Power in the Blood. And so it's a little different, but some of the words are very similar. But I just want to say, again, no matter where you're at today in your life, no matter the mountaintop you're on, or the valley or the desert you're in, no matter how broken you may feel, how lost you may feel, how far from God you feel, or how close to God you feel today, come to the foot of the cross, where His blood was shed for us, because there is power in that blood. Power to forgive, power to heal, power to restore. Heavenly Father, we just thank you so much for this time that we have, that we celebrate each week, coming to the table and taking part of these emblems to remind us of who you are and who we are because of your love for us. We thank you for this time. Help us to remember. Help us to commune with you as we partake today.
There is power in the have Billy come up in just a moment here. I'm a little disappointed that you didn't mistake me for being the modern-day mountain man today. Nobody even noticed, you know. Dick Robinson's, yeah, I've been working on that for 2 months, haven't you, preacher? I just thought I'd play the part of the rugged outdoorsman today, and nobody even noticed. So my manhood has just been smashed, all right? But anyway, super excited to have Billy come today. Billy will inspire you and will lead you. I think God has worked in his life, and I think Billy grew up going to church some, but really didn't have a faith of his own, and just through some of his experience, that faith has just been developed. And I think when you feel insignificant, probably in a big old country, in a big old state like Alaska, not a country, but it probably feels like it, living out in the country, you have time to reflect. And his reflections drew him to a creator. So he comes today. Let's give him a Ladysmith welcome, and Billy, we'll send it over to you. So welcome, Billy.
I've been public speaking for about 12 years. It's always nice to be invited back for a second time. I think the last time that I've been invited back to anything was about 30-some years ago. It was in 4th grade. This is a little bit more joyous of a occasion. So it's my sincere pleasure to join you here today. So I was here a couple of years ago, so I'll repeat a little bit about my background here. I was born and raised on a dairy farm near Turtle Lake, Wisconsin. This is the farm where my grandpa was raised, where my dad was raised. This is where I was raised. Now, in addition to being a farmer, my grandfather was also a professional trapper. So he would farm all season long. At the end of the fall harvest, he would go into the north woods of Wisconsin, usually between Hayward and Eagle River. Build a log cabin, trap all winter. After the spring thaw would come, he would come home, bring his furs home, sell his furs, buy seed, start a new farming season all over again. And so it was largely his influence, his stories, a lot of his pictures that just really, something came alive in me. I was just fascinated by it. And I just loved the thought of the lifestyle that he would have lived out there. I never did that with him. I trapped around home, but I never went out and stayed in a cabin with him for 6 months. I would have loved to. And my dad also took me trapping as a kid. And I'll never forget, I was about, I think I was about 8 years old. And I started trapping with my grandpa, and I just loved it. I wanted to be a professional trapper. And so my dad would always tell me about how my grandpa would take him trapping on Lightning Creek for muskrats. And I begged him and begged him. Finally, one year, he's like, all right, let's get some traps together. We threw a rowboat in the back of the truck. We milked the cows on a Saturday morning, so it was like 9 o'clock, and we go down Lightning Creek, and we shove away from the road. And as we're oaring, all of a sudden, the bridge, this little backcountry road, goes out of sight. We round the bend. The power lines are out of sight. Henry Hines' farm is soon out of sight. And it was a light switch moment for me. I was completely immersed in the wilderness. And it was just like something came alive inside of me. And right there in that instant, I knew I wanted to live my life in nature somehow. And my grandpa told me, he said, Billy, if you want outdoor adventure, Alaska's the place you want to go. So by the time I was 12 years old, I knew I wanted to go to Alaska. And I investigated it. Understood, come to find out it's very expensive to go there and get out into the wilderness and a bush flight and all that. And I figured, well, I'm going to make a career out of it. So I signed up for this guide school in Montana right after high school, and it came time for me to go to this guide school. And I asked my mom and my dad for guidance. I said, should I go to college? Should I stay on the farm? Should I go to this guide school? My mom said, Billy, if you have this dream and you don't do it now, you never will. And so I go to guide school, and my mom gave me some great advice there. It was a month-long course in Montana. It was primarily geared to becoming a Western guide. So largely what they taught me was how to load, pack on horses and mules, work with stock, and go way into the bush, into the wilderness, and then pack yourself out and be self-sufficient. So after that month-long course, I got a job in Idaho. And my job as a packer, we would lead these horses and mules, sometimes as far as 30 miles into the mountains. After the hunters were successful, they would hunt mule deer, elk, bighorn sheep, and then we would get horses and mules and pack all those animals out of the field. So this was my best friend in my 4 months that I spent in Idaho. His name was Earl. This mule would go anywhere. And so I came home after that fall season, road called, emailed every outfitter I could find in Alaska, told them I was a farm kid greener than grass, didn't know anything about hunting in Alaska, but I wanted to learn and I was willing to do whatever it took. And so I got hired as a packer in Alaska that following spring on Kodiak Island. And the big difference between a packer in Alaska and a packer out west, as a packer in Alaska, I was the mule. It was my job to backpack all these meat, cape, antlers, and hides out of the wilderness. And so now anywhere from 100 to 80 to 120 days each year, I'm guiding across the state. And so I'll be leaving here this fall, August 4th. I'll go way up into the Arctic in the Brooks Range, and here we'll hunt sheep, grizzly bear, and caribou. And then I'll go to Southwest Alaska and guide for moose. And then in October, I'll be right down there hunting brown bear. And I also guide for brown bear on Kodiak Island. So everything in nature has a purpose. Okay? Everything happens for a reason. You see this bull moose, he starts growing his antlers in May, or actually April. Okay? And so they'll grow antlers five months' time, and they'll weigh 80 pounds. And then the velvet is shed, just like our white-tailed deer, that velvety substance as the horn is growing. They shed that late August, early September, right in time for the rut. These moose, they find one another through vocalization. The cow will make a sound like this as she comes into heat. That real resonant tone like that echoes throughout the valleys. Well, now you see those antlers, that serves as a parabola, or basically a satellite dish. So that sound is casted out, and these antlers are now hard and reflective, just within a week or two's time. And so that sound comes in, heat hits the bull's antlers, and they're perfectly reflected to the bull's huge ears. So I've called moose from 5 miles away because of their antlers. Everything serves a function in nature, everything has a purpose, and timing is everything. And as a guide, as a hunter, that's what you really need to be focused on, because that's what helps you to become more successful in the field. So in my time in Alaska, I'm guiding for caribou, guiding for Dall sheep. This is an amazing animal. They have 10-power vision. So they see the world as you and I would if we were looking through binoculars. So you'll never fool their eyesight. And this is the country that they live in. Very, very challenging. Now a sheep, you're usually going to find them up on the mountainsides. They don't like to be in the valleys because that's where their predators are, wolves and bears. Now sheep, they're not a very smart animal, but they can climb incredibly well. They're not very fast either. So a wolf or a grizzly bear, if it encounters a sheep in this low country, they're going to catch them every single time. That's why the sheep likes to live where other animals can't. They're more sure-footed, and so they always like to go up into the rocks to escape their predators. And sheep meat, Dall sheep in particular, the best wild game I've ever eaten. I'm not a fan of mutton, but most of these sheep that we're taking, they're 10 to 12 years old, by far the best wild game I've ever eaten. So we're also hunting grizzly bears and brown bears. In addition to being a guide, I'm also a freelance writer, author. I've got one book, working on a second, and I'm a filmmaker. I titled my video series The Modern Day Mountain Man, because as a kid, that's what I wanted to live like, a mountain man. Started filming, so ever since I've been to Alaska, so that I could bring my footage back and show my grandpa, who never made it to Alaska, and one thing led to another, and it's been a great blessing in my life, and I really enjoy the storytelling aspect. And eventually that's led to me speaking at events like this, corporate organizations, church functions, safety meetings, all kinds of Christian outreach events, and I really, really enjoy it. And so I go to a lot of these things, and I meet a lot of different people, and I get asked a lot of the same questions. So I'm going to try to address them, some of those for you here today. Everybody always asks, well, what's the weather like? Of course, me being a Christian man, I always have to tell them the truth. I say, the weather in Alaska is always beautiful. I always ask, well, then bush flying, isn't that dangerous? And you can can probably imagine an Alaskan bush pilot. They're kind of like a half-cocked thrill seeker all the time, which is kind of true, but I say, oh yes, the pilots, they're a little bit off-center, but they're always safe and they're always reliable. Everybody asks, well, the bugs in Alaska, I heard they're really bad. I'm like, oh, they're basically non-existent. Don't worry about bugs if you go to Alaska. Well, how about bears? Do you ever get bears in your camp? Not very often. They're usually not a big problem. Another one we always get is wolves. Well, aren't they endangered? You can actually hunt wolves? Actually, in Alaska, there's some areas you don't even need to buy a tag. It would be like a woodchuck. Basically, that's kind of how they look at them. They are so, I don't know if I'd say rampant, but basically in recorded history, wolves are at an all-time high. In the 70s, wolf hides were worth $350 for a wolf hide. Gas was $1 a gallon. Today, gas is $10 a gallon. Wolf hides are $350. Okay, so there's no economic feasibility to hunt and trap wolves anymore. So now that population is very, very high. The wolf is a fascinating animal, and they're probably the best hunter, maybe in the world, maybe probably in North America. So I'm always studying them any chance that I can. But one thing you can be sure of is a wolf, and anything in nature, everything in nature, as far as I'm concerned, is totally honest. They're going to do whatever they have to do to best suit themselves, no more, no less. And this is the brutal truth of how wolves survive. You know, they've got this cow, they've got it surrounded, and they've torn it apart a little bit. It's just a matter of time before it dies, and they know that, and they're patient enough, and they're willing to let that wait it out. But the greatest leader in nature, in all of North America that I've ever experienced, is the alpha wolf. And I experienced this dynamic of a wolf pack here a couple of years ago when I was moose and grizzly bear hunting in southwest Alaska. We were glassing this ridge top. We were hunting a couple days. We were seeing some moose, but it was a little slow. I was guiding a couple of brothers. And so it was getting on dark, and they'd had a long day. They said, oh, we're going to go back to camp. I'm like, yeah, that's fine. I'm going to stick it out here the last 15 minutes and glass. And so up on this ridge, I see all these silhouettes, and I think, oh, it's a herd of caribou. That's odd. There's not many caribou in that area. And then I glass, and I see it's a wolf pack. So it's 13 wolves. Like, holy smokes, they're 2 miles away, and they're kind of trotting down this ridge, kind of somewhat towards camp, but there's no time for us to go get them. But I go back to camp just to show my hunters. I'm like, look at this, there's a wolf pack out here, and I tried howling at them, but it was too windy, they couldn't hear me. My hunters are like, do you think they'll be there in the morning? I'm like, I doubt it, but we'll see what happens. Now in this area, there's no limit on the number of wolves that we could shoot. That's the reason they up the limit of wolves that hunters can take, because they're very intelligent, their home ranges are huge, and the country is obviously so vast, and very few people trap them anymore because there's no economic feasibility to it anymore. So we wake up in the morning, and I look over on the ridge, there's the wolves. They're still bedded there, all 13 of them. Well, I try howling at them, but they can't hear me. And so I grab this, it was actually a Parmesan cheese container that I cut the bottom of. That was my megaphone. And so I went, oh! Well, then the wolves, they heard that, and they all started howling. And they howled for about a minute, and then they gathered into an area about the size, maybe half the church here. And they started howling, and all my hunters are like, wow, do you think they're going to come in? I'm like, well, you better be ready. They might, you know. So they're gathering up their gear, and so we just wait. And finally, I just, like, all right, you guys about ready? I'll give one more call. We'll see what they do. And I called once more, and they never made a peep. They just started coming. And so as they start coming, and I'm filming this, actually, we run to get into position. By the time I start filming, they've kind of spread out a little bit. But as they first started out, they went single file. So the alpha wolf, the leader of the pack, he goes in the front, and they're all dot, 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 dot right behind him. Eventually, 5 of the younger, smaller ones, they veer off into the brush, but 8 of them start coming towards us right in a single file line. Now, what are those wolves, those 7 in the back, what are they focusing on? They're not looking for the moose or the rival pack or whatever it is. They're focusing on the alpha wolf. They're watching the leader. So that leader, they're responding by what he does, not anything else they see, because the leader's job is to guide them, to take them into battle, to find their food. Now as they get closer, now they know, all right, our leader is leading us into this charge. There's a cow moose here, we're going to go kill it. As they get closer, slowly, eventually, they start to fan out wider and wider. And so you can about imagine me and these farm boys from Iowa as these wolves are coming to us and they're getting closer and closer and closer. And they're worried. At first they were worried about how far away their shot was going to be. And I'm like, okay, it's 400, 300, 200. Okay, now we're less than 100. Just hold right on. And they're coming right at us. Finally, they're 40 yards away, so a little farther than from here to the back of the church. And I'm thinking, these wolves, they don't see us, but they're still coming. And I'm worried that they're going to run right on past us. And so finally, I just started going, whoop, 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 trying to get them to freeze, and they wouldn't hear me. Finally, eventually, they just stop, and they freeze, they lock up and look at us. Well, then the guns start blazing, and as the guns are going off, I'm like, oh my goodness, there's no limit on wolves. I could just imagine 8 wolves laying there on the ground. I'm like, I'm going to be skinning wolves for days, you know. Fortunately, my hunters weren't the best of shots. But I believe that the Bible says that God blessed them and said, be fruitful and increase in number, fill the earth and subdue it, rule over the fish in the sea, the birds in the sky, and over every living creature that moves on the ground. So I believe that nature, animals, wildlife, everything on this earth is for us to use, but also to take care of. So I definitely don't believe we should just go out and eliminate the wolf by any stretch. It's kind of an odd scenario here when you have an area like where we live in where the wolf wasn't there and then you reintroduce it. Then there again you kind of throw off the dynamic of nature. But in Alaska, the state did a study and they found that of all the moose and caribou that die in a given year, that less than 10% of those moose and caribou that die in a given year are killed by hunters. 10% die of disease and they're swept away from down a river, those sorts of things. But more than 80% of the moose and caribou that die each year in Alaska, they're killed by predators, wolves and bears. So there's still people in Alaska that they live out into the bush. They don't have a grocery store. Their grocery store is the salmon that swim up the river, the moose, the caribou. They need them to be there every year. If left unchecked, nature does have its check and balance system, and it goes like this. By that, I mean, let's say you get a wildfire in an area, okay, that depletes everything. Virtually everything kind of dies off. In about 2 years, you get these green shoots, right? And so these little willows and popples, now the moose have excellent feed, and you'll see a skyrocket in the moose population. Now you have all these moose. Pretty soon the wolves and bears, they start to thrive, right? Well, soon, eventually, that forage that the moose is surviving on grows so tall and there's no nourishment left in it that the moose start to die off. Because now you have so many moose and there's no food. Well, now the moose start to die off. Now you have all these wolves and bears. What happens to them? Now they have nothing to eat. They get to starve. They get malnourished. They start to starve and die. And then you get this yo-yo effect. So as hunters, ideally you'd come into that scenario and you'd shoot some of those moose, keep that population on a more stable basis. That's the ideal of conservation in North America. That's the best model in the whole entire world. Obviously that's not a science. You're never going to get it perfect, but the idea is that you just keep more of an ebb and flow rather than the spikes and the valleys. That way, for us humans, we always have some of that resource for us to utilize. And so what I like most about my job is being totally immersed in the wilderness. And during that time, 8 years of my life that I've lived in a tent in the wilderness, you slowly discover more of these subtle nuances and intricacies of nature and the connectivity of life in general. And when that airplane drops you off and flies away, everything changes. I said in one of my videos, it's like everything that you thought mattered in life, you can like hear the airplane still flying, and for me, the change is happening as that airplane flies away. It's like all the things that really matter in life, they just narrow down so small you can almost set them on the head of a pin. You step away from what I call all the man-made distractions of life, you really discover who you are at your core, and you gain incredible perspective. And as I said, everything in nature has a purpose, everything happens for a reason. Now we've all heard this term, balance of nature. So what does that really mean? Okay, this is what it basically means to me, is that everything is born, everything is given life, every organism, right? And then eventually, as that organism grows, something else in nature is going to help it to grow. Let's say it's a moose or whatever. Those willows, it's going to eat on those willows, and that's going to help it to grow. Well, at some point in time, that organism, as it grows, it's going to have something to give back to nature. The balance of nature comes in that the more an organism grows, the more it gives. The more it gives, the more it has to receive. And I found that to be exactly true, exactly the same in life. So I'd say the best way, or we often hear of nature being a chain. It's more like a spider web, where each organism is like a tiny strand in that web. If you pluck away, break, or disrupt one strand, it disrupts the integrity of the entire web. And so I'd say the best way to describe this is perhaps to look at the salmon. So these salmon, they come up into these streams. They're born in a stream. Okay, so these fish, these little tiny salmon fry, let's say they're born, and then they're in a river, and they swim downstream into the ocean. Depending on the species of salmon, they'll swim for 2 to 7 years. And eventually, nature will take over, and they'll come back to their stream of birth, and they will start swimming upstream. As soon as they hit the fresh water, they quit eating, so they start to die. This is a kamikaze mission that these salmon are going on. Some of the salmon will swim over 2,000 miles up the Yukon River. So salmon, they're well known for their fats, their protein that they have, because they need that to sustain themselves for those long journeys. So the most sought after salmon are those that swim the farthest up those streams because they have the most fat, nutrients, and protein. So they'll swim without eating 2,000 miles upstream. They will go to the place of their birth, and they will spawn, and they will die. All along this time, they are running a gauntlet of bears. So during the peak of the salmon spawn, a bear will jump in the river, grab a fish, pull it up on the bank, and he'll grab it by the tail. He'll rip the tail off. He'll eat the skin. If it's a female, they'll eat the eggs. They'll bite into the head, and they'll suck the brains out of the fish, and they'll leave the flesh of the fish laying there. Why is that? Because the bears, they know, they've been so hungry before that they know they're not craving the meat. They want the skin. They want those eggs because that's where the most fat, nutrients, and protein is. Okay, and so these banks, they're going to look like this. There's going to be salmon all over the place. So how is that a cycle? Okay, so now those bears, they come up, they feed on those fish. What's left of the fish, they will eat the meat, don't get me wrong, but when the fishing's really good, they won't. And so you've got this dead salmon there. Mother Nature is way more green than we could ever hope to be by recycling our plastic water bottles, you know. And so those nutrients, whatever doesn't get eaten by a fox or a weasel or birds, gulls, or ravens, that will go into the soil, which will then fertilize the ground, which helps the willows and the alders grow, which is food for the moose and the caribou and the ptarmigan and everything else. But it also helps the willow and the alders to cast their roots deeper into the soil, which prevents erosion, and so it protects the rivers that the salmon rely on. So there you can see the salmon's life go full 360 degrees. That's what I love about being in Alaska, is just understanding how it all connects together. So a trivia question here for you. Which is bigger, a grizzly bear or a brown bear? Who thinks it's a brown bear? Brown bear is bigger than a grizzly? Who thinks a grizzly bear is bigger than a brown bear? All right, we got a pretty dead heat. For any of you that were brave enough to raise your hand, you were correct, because it's actually the same animal. So the only difference is the 62nd parallel runs roughly right here. Bear is north of the 62nd parallel. He is a grizzly bear. He takes one step south of the 62nd parallel. He just became a brown bear. That's the only difference. But the reason why grizzly bears in theory are much, much smaller than a brown bear is they live farther north. They're usually more disconnected from the ocean, which is the mother of life, basically. So their food source isn't as strong. They live in harsher environments. They hibernate longer. They don't have as long a growing season. So this is a 22-year-old grizzly bear, weighs 700 pounds. This is an 18-year-old brown bear, weighs about 1,500 pounds. So it's a huge, huge difference. So these brown bears, they're living on this coastal environment, and so they have a lot more salmon. But of course, the grizzly bear he has a pretty nasty reputation, right? That's largely because they don't have as good a food source as a brown bear. A brown bear in the peak of the salmon spawn, he's not even gonna, if a moose walks right by him, he's not even gonna bother trying to kill the moose. It's not worth the energy when he can just go into a river, get a much salmon that offers much more sustainability to him than to worry about killing that moose. A grizzly bear, however, they don't know when their next meal is coming. They're gonna eat berries, willow buds, dig in the ground for squirrels, upturn rocks looking for moths. They see a human, quite often they're going to come at it and try to kill it. That's where they get that bad reputation. So my next hunt takes place in southwest Alaska. I was guiding a father and his 17-year-old daughter. So it was Mitch and Maddie. With me on this hunt is fellow guide John Anderson. So I had guided Mitch before, and John has a lot of experience in Alaska. Because I had guided Mitch before, John said, all right, you're in charge. You know, there can only be one chief here, so whatever you need me to do, you just tell me and I'll do it. Great. And John was a pretty eclectic individual, as most Alaskans, and particularly Alaskan guides are. He was born and raised in Illinois. When he was 9 years old, all of his hair fell out, and that's when he discovered that he has alopecia. And especially 20, 30 years ago, the way kids were, the way I was, John got bullied a lot as a 9-year-old kid with no hair. Well, John toughened up pretty quick, and he discovered in real short order the best way to silence a bully was to beat his mouth shut. John said that he was in 200 fist fights before he graduated the 3rd high school he went to, because he got kicked out of all the schools. So John was a pretty tough dude, but a great guy to have in camp. So first day out, we shoot this 66-inch bull, we pack it out, get all the meat back to camp. Next morning, we're up on the hill, and we're getting ready to try to find Mitch, a moose, and a grizzly bear as well. And also, Maddie was there to hunt grizzly bear too. And so we spot this grizzly bear way up on this ridge about 1.5 miles away, and Maddie decided it was one she wanted to go after. Her dad asked her, Maddie, is that a bear you'd like to take? It was almost like a cartoon. Maddie just kind of looks at his, sweet little girl, looks at her daddy and smiles and bats her lashes. Yes, Daddy, Because the way it works is you go on a moose hunt, and then if you shoot a grizzly bear, you have to pay a trophy fee for it to go after the moose. So the dad was a little bit hesitant, but as soon as his daughter batted her eyelashes at her, I knew we were going to go grizzly bear hunting. So I asked John, John, would you stay back and just signal for us as we go through this brush in case that bear moves? It's nice to have a guy that has some elevation that he can give us directions. You can't use communication, a walkie-talkie or anything like that, but he can signal us. He's like, yeah, absolutely, you guys go after it. So we get after this bear, we move through the brush, get up over here, bear's right here, we set up right there. We're less than 100 yards away, we're set up prone, we've got Maddie set, and just then the bear sees us. And so Maddie's all ready. I'm like, if you're comfortable, go ahead and take it. So when bear sees you, he's either going to charge at you or he's going to take off and run. Especially for a young hunter, I don't want either scenario to happen, but certainly not to charge at us. And so the bear is kind of looking at us, and Maddie's like, yeah, I'm ready. Boom, she shoots, she hits the bear. I'm videotaping the event, and Mitch is backing her up. So after Maddie shoots, she jams her rifle, so she can't get another shell into the rifle. So I tell Mitch, go ahead, Mitch, go ahead and shoot. Boom, Mitch shoots. Boom, Mitch shoots. Airballs both of them. At this point, I'm videotaping. Maddie's still working her bolt. Mitch doesn't seem to be doing a very good job backing her up. I've got my rifle laying to the side. Just like anything in life, when you think it's a sure thing, it's a done deal, it can't be screwed up, that's when things get screwed up, right? My rifle's unloaded. I drop my video camera, load a round in, turn my scope from 1 to 4 power. I'm offhand because I want to make sure I'm far enough away from my hunters to be safe. I have nothing to rest on, and so I'm kneeling, I'm offhand, and my rifle is everywhere but on the bear. Bear's just about ready to go into the brush, and I just kind of bear down, boom, whack, I hit the bear on the hind end, unfortunately, because that's all that I could see. The bear rolls into the brush, out of sight. Like, whew, all right, well, let's see what we've got here. This could get interesting. So I tell Mitch and Maddie, you guys just stay there. I walk up to the brush where the bear went in. I could see where the grass was pushed down. I could see the brush was disrupted, but I didn't see any blood. So I get into the brush, and I could maybe see my hand. This brush is so thick. Willows, alders, kind of like our tag alders, but these are 10 times worse. The limbs, they grow sideways. A bush will be this tall, but the limbs will be 20 feet long because they just grow out and then they intermingle, and it's crazy trying to get through this stuff. And so as I go about 5 feet into the brush, I still can't find blood, but I can smell grizzly bear. I'm like, holy smokes, this is not good. And so I back out, I glass up at John up on the hill, and John's looking down at me, and I do the come on and save me Johnny boy wave, and he just waves his hand and he grabs his pack and he starts coming down towards us. So I walk back up to Mitch and Maddie, I pull out my video camera, and we review the footage. And Maddie's first shot hit the bear in the wrist, or the paw. And you don't have to be a very experienced bear hunter to recognize that a shot in the wrist and a shot in the butt is not an ideal scenario with a grizzly bear, but it's what we had to deal with. And so we eat a little lunch, we're waiting for John to come down. Eventually I see John coming, and I kind of wanted to have a private conversation with John to figure out how we were going to do this. And so I walk over and get to this creek to get some water. John comes huffing and puffing up the hill, and when I see him, he comes up. Of course, he's bald and just sweat running everywhere, and he's smiling. I'm looking at him. Guides have kind of a maniacal sense of humor, and I'm like, what is he smiling about? Next thing I know, I find myself smiling, and as he gets closer, he starts to laugh. The next thing I know, I'm laughing, and I think it was just because we kind of knew what we're getting into, what's about to happen. First words out of his mouth is, all right, how do you want to handle this? I said, well, we don't want Maddie going in the brush and a wounded grizzly bear. I said, Mitch, I trust him. I think we'll maybe have him keep his rifle unloaded, because I'm more worried about the guy behind me with a loaded rifle than I am the grizzly bear. And I said, you and I will go in loaded. Mitch will mark last blood for us, and I'll take the lead, I'll take the blood, you cover my flank, and we'll bird dog this thing out and, do our jobs, get it done. It's like, all right, sounds good. Only one problem. He said, I'm taking the blood. What he's talking about is if you're working in teams, and this should always be done in teams, is the guy taking the blood, he's going to be in front following the blood trail. His head's going to be down. This guy has the most dangerous job because he's going to be the one closest on the bear's back trail. So oftentimes, just like almost most animals will do this, if they're wounded, they'll circle back, and so they can watch their blood trail to see if anything's following them, particularly bears. They're notorious for it because they want to ambush anything that follows them. And so I wanted to take the blood, but John wants to take the blood. So that guy has the most dangerous job. The most important job is the guy behind, because it's his job to kill the grizzly bear before it kills that guy. So John starts to argue with me. He's like, I'm taking the blood. He's like, Billy, I've got no kids, I've got no wife. If I die today, nobody's really going to miss me. And I argue with him, no, John, this is my mess. I'm taking the blood. We're going back and forth. Eventually I realized, okay, John's been in 200 fist fights. All right, John, we're doing it your way. So we go into the brush. John's taking point, and here you can see how thick it is. Basically, we had to get down like this so we could get under the leaves, the foliage, to see anything. So we could maybe see about from here to the chairs was about max, these front chairs. So we're finding pretty good blood as we're sneaking through. We're getting closer and closer. Everybody's always asking, man, that's got to be an adrenaline rush. It is completely 180 degrees the opposite of an adrenaline rush. It's one of the most peaceful things that I've done in my life is go in and stalk a bear. I've never gotten buck fever stalking a bear, ever, in 22 years. If I try to shoot a white-tailed doe for meat in the Wisconsin deer season, I still get buck fever like I was 12 years old, I get nervous. But you are so hyper-focused on the job at hand, working with the people that you're with, and you are listening for a bird to chirp, a stick to break, any information that nature will give you to help you kill the bear before it kills you. The rest of the world ceases to exist. You are laser focused. And so we would go about 10 feet. We actually jumped the bear at one point from about here to the wall. Both John and I, boom, boom, we get a shot at it. We hit the bear, and it runs further away. Give it an hour, and then we go back on the blood. We have better blood. So we realized, okay, we're going to find this bear. But we go about 100 yards and we still don't find the bear. At that point, John and I both knew that we were going to find the bear, but it wasn't going to be alive. And so Mitch is kind of standing back. He would just stay about, pretty smart guy. Most of these guys that I guide, they're fairly well-to-do, so they're pretty intelligent. Mitch was smart enough to stay about 10 feet back at all times, And so he, as I was watching him, he had his video camera held up. And I'm like, you're videotaping, Mitch? He's like, yeah. I'm like, well, it works better if you take the lens cap off. Okay, all right. So and I'm like, you might as well hit the record button. I said, because when it happens, it's going to happen fast, and I think it's going to happen pretty quick. Both John and I, I don't even know what it was, but we just had this sense that it was going to happen soon. So we would go about 10 feet at a time. We would just crouch and duck walk. Anytime John's rifle was facing that way, I would face the other way. And so at one point, we're just sitting there, and John looks back at me, and I look over at him, and he nods, and I give him a nod back, and John just goes like this to part the brush. And all of a sudden, everything just comes alive. This bear starts charging out at us. That was Mitch's camera. As you can see, he fell down, dropped his camera, the viewfinder slapped shut, and that was the end of it. I do have a GoPro, so I do have this on video. And but anyways, so this bear's coming at John, and he's just sitting there waiting. I step up alongside of him, and John's got a .458 Lot. If you're not really familiar with rifles, it's about 2 steps down from a cannon. It's a huge gun. He's got 2 rounds in his .458. I've got a .375. And it seems, in my mind, it seems like John's basically waiting for the bear to be from here to the collection plate before he's ready to shoot. But we can't see the bear. But we know it's right there. And eventually I can see the brush being mowed down in front, so being mowed down, and then brush flying back up. Well, I went to Turtle Lake High School. That's probably not something that I brag about, but I am smart enough to figure, okay, the bear must be somewhere in between there, right? So I figure I've got 4 rounds. The bear's from me to the organ away. I could probably afford to start shooting. So boom, I shoot, boom, boom, boom. The first time we see the bear, I would say it was about from here to the piano away. The thing falls down, and boom, I had 1 shot in my rifle, and I made darn sure that I didn't miss that one, and finished the bear. And so the bear's just laying there, and we're clearing our rifles, we're getting all safe. Well, Mitch crawls back up out of the brush, pulls his video camera, he's like, holy smokes, that was intense. Like, yeah, you should have been up here and seen it. It was way more intense, And so he's like, oh, wait a minute, he's all shaking, He's like, I'm gonna get this thing running. Oh man, that was intense. And he looks back up on the hill to make sure his daughter's still alive, He's like, okay. And he holds his camera up. He's like, all right, you guys, hold out your hands. And so John and I, we both held our hands out side by side. And Mitch is holding his camera. I wouldn't believe it if I didn't see it. I don't know whether to be more nervous or comforted by the fact that your guys' hands are stone still right now. John and I look at each other. You should probably be a little bit nervous and a little bit comforted by that fact. And so we ended up getting the bear down, clean it out and do everything. But as I walked away from that hunt, I just realized what John did for me that day. And Jesus said, greater love has no man than this, to lay down one's life for his friends. I recognize that's what John did for me and my family, my wife, my kids who he's never met. He put my life, their lives, in front of his own. And that's what an alpha wolf does. Anytime that I'm speaking at corporate functions, talking about leadership, I always use the alpha wolf as an example. And I see so much, almost like, I don't know what you want to call it, like scriptural links to nature. Because everything in nature is giving to everything else. Everything, it's just like the church body. We're all relying on one another. We're all a web, a little strand in the web of an ecosystem. And the people that I've met, guys like John, it's just really changed my life. Really been a blessing. So here's my family. And so anytime I think of John Anderson, I think of, and I see him, I think of what he did, what he offered to me and my family that day, and that will always be his legacy. Now, it may sound counterintuitive, but I know I'm a better dad because of the 100 days of the year that I'm gone. And I assure you, my wife will tell you that I'm a better husband because of the 100 days that I'm gone every year. At least she loves me more as a husband when I'm gone. But when I kiss my wife and my kids goodbye, and you can't help but recognize there's a very real chance that I may never see them again. August 4th, I'm going to do it again, I guess I've been going there 22 years, but I usually go twice a year. But that's a pretty humbling feeling, But once I'm in the wilderness, away from my family for those long periods of time, it's amazing how simple and very basic my memories of my family get. And you realize that life is all about the little things, those tiny little moments that we live and share with other people. You realize that life doesn't get any better than seeing your daughter's face light up when you give her an owl hooter and she blows on it, and then she hears a turkey gobble in response to it for the first time. Those are some of the greatest memories that you'll ever have. And you realize enjoying a sunset together can be just as memorable as any vacation. And when I'm away in Alaska, I'll also remember the fight my kids had when I had one grunt call when I took them deer hunting together, and they're fighting over who gets it, and then you realize that, okay, I just got to buy them both a grunt call so they can toot on it when we're hunting together. And when I'm sitting in a cold, snowy ridge 3,000 miles away, I bet you could probably imagine how, as a father, how much you just love to be home and just have hot chocolate with your kids. Those are the precious little memories that I remember. And you realize that for a 5-year-old kid, taking her out on Lightning Creek, it's those little things. A trip to Lightning Creek in a canoe for 45 minutes, that's like an Amazon adventure to them, And come spring, when your wife asks you, Daddy, are we going to tap maple trees this spring? You realize there's nothing better in this world than having somebody call you Daddy. My life's dream is for my kids to never quit calling me Daddy. I want them to be 40 years old. I still want to be here, but I want them to be calling me Daddy. And who I am, the good and the bad, is largely because of my own father, the man here on the left with my brother and I. When he took me trapping that one year, he didn't have time. A small dairy farm, we had 60 to 70 cows at the most. There was always food on the table, but there was never anything to be, no money to be dispelled foolishly. Time was a premium. My mom worked 60 hours a week at an office at a feed mill, and she still milked cows twice a day, 7 days a week. My parents were hard-working people, just like most farmers. But my dad took the time out that one fall and took me muskrat trapping, and it changed my whole life. It's just those little things that he did. And Jesus tells us, very truly I tell you, the Son can do nothing by himself. He can do only what he sees his Father doing, because whatever the Father does, the Son does also. I was very blessed to have a father and a mother who not only raised me and instilled morals and values in me, but more importantly, they fertilized the seed that God planted inside me. My dad didn't take me trapping because he didn't have anything better to do, and he didn't do it so that he could take a picture of me when I caught a muskrat and then post it on Facebook so he could look good to the world, He did it solely for me. He knew that I loved being in nature, and I was persistent, and I wanted to experience this. And had he not taken me muskrat trapping that one fall, I probably wouldn't be here with you today. My dad, he's still teaching me, and he's still influencing me. My dad, he still farms, and I know he still loves it, because my dad is the exact same person, whether corn is $3 a bushel or whether it's $8 a bushel. He just loves, I tease him all the time, you're just like a kid playing in the dirt. He just loves to plant something in the ground, watch it grow, and nurture it along. It's what I believe that he was created to do, and Lord willing, I'm fairly certain my dad will farm until the day he dies. But seeing all his work, his dedication and his perseverance through all the challenges that come with a farm, all the hardships that come along throughout our lives together, that has molded me into who I am. My dad has taught me no matter how hard it is for me to leave my family each year, as long as it's still in my heart that I should go, then I need to go. Because whatever the Father does, your child will do also. And actions speak louder than words. And I know I've seen my children mimic my actions, and I got to tell you, there's some times that I haven't been too impressed with the things that they're doing that they learned from me, their old man, you know. Parenting is a tough job, I know that all too well. And as fathers, we're expected to provide, keep everyone safe, be a good leader, set a good example, but above all else, the most important thing we can do for our children is to simply love them. My challenge to us as parents, particularly fathers, is to love them for who they are. And there's no doubt in my mind that God's calling in my life was to explore nature and to share it with others. The biggest positive impact I feel I can offer other people, our ecosystem, our world, is by being here today and sharing my passion, my knowledge, my love of nature with others. And as a father, I feel the best example that I can set for my kids is to not only teach them and guide them and nurture their talents and passions, but to also be certain that they see their father living out God's calling on his life. Because I believe the greatest gift we as parents can give to our children is to lead them to a relationship with Christ and help them to discover a life of abundant joy, fruitful, and overflowing life that God has created them to live. And how we guide them to that life is by simply loving them and taking the time to do the little things with them. I really appreciate my chance to be here with you again this morning. I want to encourage all the fathers, because I do know what it's like. It's mothers probably have it way tougher. I think women have it tougher in general and everything in life. Don't get me wrong, but a father's struggle is very real. And the one thing that I would say when I look back in my life as a guy that spent those 8 years of my life in a tent, probably 7.5 of those years, I've been with another guy. 90%, 95% of those guys are fathers. And I recognize it's given me the confidence to be more open and share my faith with large audiences, because over a 10-day period, when it's just you and one individual, it's amazing the things that they will share, and you realize that every man, every human, every person, we're all going through things. There's strongholds in all of our lives, and we're challenged, and there's things that we would like to change. And so I would just like to encourage all the fathers out there to know that it's just the little things. You don't have to keep up with your neighbor or take them on amazing vacations. It's simple things like hot chocolate, taking your kids trapping, taking them fishing, just being with them and love them. And I'd say what I'm learning as a parent, it's not so much about raising them, it's just fertilizing them. God's planted a seed in them. All they need is the love for that to grow. So with that, I want to wish you all a very blessed Father's Day. It's been my pleasure to share some of my experiences with you. And God bless every one of you here today. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Billy. You're going to have a moment. He's got some resources in the back that if you want to talk to him, you can. We won't have a lot of time because the second sermon will be starting in a few minutes. But I just really appreciate Billy and the way his faith has grown and the way he's concerned about people's lives. And he's talked to me. He says, "Yeah, I grew up going to church. Hello." It just wasn't.
Yes, I am. Yep, I'm Billy.
Just wasn't connecting at times, but then through some of these experiences, his faith just became stronger and stronger, and now he reflects back and he puts some of those lessons that God taught him through nature, and he incorporates that in his own family and shares it with us. And I just appreciate the way his faith has grown. and he sees God at work. And so if you will, you can help us out. It does cost a little money to bring Billy in. If you feel like you want to contribute to that, there's a box in the back. You're welcome to do that. Billy has resources out there that assist him and his family. And don't forget, we got paint night Tuesday night. We got skating Wednesday night, and we have church in the park coming up as well. I know we have several visitors today. We'll let you go. You can chat with Billy and be encouraged that way. But we'll pray, and we pray that you have a blessed Father's Day. Dear God, we're thankful that you are a good, good Father. And not everybody believes that. Not everybody experiences that. But our desire as a church is to spread the good news so that others might come to a saving faith in Jesus Christ. I thank you for Billy's life, who his faith has just been developed slowly at times. And now he has placed his faith and trust in you because of the things he's seen and the things that you created. Romans tells us we are without excuse because of the things that you've created and made. We can see your handiwork. We're awestruck when we see how all the intricacies of life fit together. I pray for the fathers that are here today. We are grateful for the fathers that we had. Not all of us had loving fathers, but we have found a loving Father in you, and we are grateful. Bless this day, we pray in Jesus' name. Amen. Have a good Father's Day.